What if the soil beneath the Amazon is not only a quiet foundation for trees, but also a living archive of human touch long ago? When we look at the earth, we often see it as simple ground, something to walk upon or to grow plants in. Yet soil is more than a surface. It is layered, it is structured, it is patient. It keeps traces of what has happened, long after the makers of those traces have vanished. Here, in the middle of the great forest, we find unusual soil known as dark earth, or terra preta. The name simply means black soil in Portuguese. Unlike the ordinary ground, which is often poor and quickly washed away by rain, this dark earth stays fertile for centuries. It is as if the soil itself was gently baked, enriched, transformed by human presence. Now we are in a scale of time that stretches over hundreds, even thousands of years. The forest above us may change, but the dark soil remains steady, like a slow, breathing memory of cultivation. When we imagine how this soil could form, we think of processes both natural and human. In many cases, scientists believe people once mixed charcoal, broken pottery, food waste, and other remains into the ground. Over time, these additions created a rich and lasting layer. Charcoal, in particular, resists decay. It holds nutrients the way a sponge holds water. So the soil stays alive even in heavy rains. To understand this, we can think of compost at home. When we add scraps to it and let it rest, the mixture becomes darker, richer, and better for plants. Terra preta may be a vast ancient compost, made slowly, patiently, by hands we cannot see anymore. But before we go too far, we must pause. Not every dark patch of soil means people made it. Some soils become rich through natural processes, deposits from rivers, the presence of certain plants, or even fire caused by lightning. The difficulty is to tell when a soil is natural, and when it has been carefully shaped. This uncertainty teaches us humility. We cannot always draw hard lines. Absence of clear proof is not proof of absence. So, what language does this soil speak to us? It carries fragments of pottery, sometimes tiny shards, mixed with the grains of earth. It holds pieces of charcoal, stable through the centuries. Its chemistry reveals traces of phosphorus, calcium, and other nutrients, markers of long-ago activity. Even pollen can remain, showing what plants once grew nearby. Each of these signs is small, quiet, and indirect. But when we listen to them together, they begin to form a story. Let us try a gentle thought experiment. Imagine people settling along a riverbank, centuries ago. They clear small patches of forest, grow crops, cook food, burn wood. Each day, bits of ash and scraps of waste go into the soil. At first, it changes little. But year by year, the ground grows darker. After generations, the soil becomes rich and strong. Then imagine the people moving on, or fading away. The forest returns, covering their homes and fields. Yet the soil remains. Now, hundreds of years later, a scientist digs and finds it. The dark layer speaks, softly, of forgotten lives. If we extend this thought further, we see how the forest itself may be growing on top of these hidden foundations. The trees, the roots, the vines, all drawing from a soil enriched by hands long gone. In this way, even if no walls or monuments stand, the presence of humans endures in the ground. It is not dramatic. It is not obvious. But it is steady. And that steadiness carries weight. Still, we must end gently, without rushing to conclusions. The dark earth may show human influence, but how widespread, how organized, how deliberate, these questions remain open. It could point to small communities, or to something larger. We cannot be certain. What we can say is that soil remembers. It holds layers like pages in a book, some clearer than others. And when we learn to read those layers, we touch, for a moment, the faint outline of people who once lived, and the quiet persistence of their traces under the vast green silence. What if the forest itself is not only a home for life, but also a vast and gentle cover, a blanket stretched over whatever lies beneath? From above, the Amazon appears endless, a sea of green without interruption. The canopy closes itself tightly, so that even light struggles to reach the ground. For us, it is as if we are looking at the surface of an ocean, unable to see what lies below the waves. This image reminds us that the forest does not only grow, it also hides. Over scales of centuries and millennia, the Amazon's cover has deepened, layer upon layer of roots, vines, and fallen leaves. What begins as a clearing can vanish in a single season, reclaimed by plants with a speed that feels almost deliberate. Wood rots, paths fade, structures collapse. Within a few decades, signs of human presence dissolve, and within centuries, they are almost gone. Yet almost is not the same as completely. Now we can pause for a moment to see how this cover works. The canopy, meaning the high roof of trees, blocks sunlight and keeps moisture close to the ground. When buildings or clearings are left alone, the forest begins its slow reclaiming. Seeds fall into cracks, roots push through stone, vines pull walls apart. The process is quiet but relentless. In this way, the forest becomes not only a habitat but also a mask. We may think of it like a thick carpet spread across a floor. Once it is in place, the pattern beneath disappears, though it has not ceased to exist. But before we treat the canopy only as a barrier, we must also recognize its dual role. It both conceals and preserves. Beneath its dense layers, soil and traces are protected from wind, sun, and even some forms of erosion. The very thing that hides also shields. This tension between concealment and preservation is what makes the Amazon so difficult, and so intriguing, to study. Evidence hides in plain sight, but also survives longer because of the same cover. What we do not know is vast. Even today, only a small fraction of the Amazon has been carefully surveyed. Its scale is simply too great. From the ground, vision is blocked by thick vegetation. From the air, only a sea of treetops is visible. The tools we have, such as satellite images and radar, are limited. They may show unusual shapes beneath the green, lines and grids that appear artificial. But the signals are faint, and interpretation is uncertain. A straight line could be a road, or it could be the natural course of a ridge. A circle might be a settlement, or a coincidence of trees and soil. Absence of certainty is not absence of possibility. Now let us look more closely at the language of traces. Hidden beneath the forest, earthworks, raised areas of soil, ditches, and geometric enclosures sometimes appear when vegetation is cleared. These shapes do not form easily by chance. They suggest order, though their meaning remains unclear. Similarly, the distribution of certain plant species can act as markers. When nut trees or fruit trees appear in unusual clusters, it hints that people may once have cultivated or encouraged them. Even in the structure of the canopy itself, scientists sometimes detect subtle patterns, as if the ghost of a plan is still imprinted on the living forest. To imagine this more clearly, let us try a slow thought experiment. Imagine a community building a small network of paths and houses in the forest. They clear space, plant crops, perhaps dig canals. From above, we would see neat lines and shapes. Time passes. The people move or disappear. The forest takes over. After 50 years, the paths are faint but still visible. After 100, they are nearly gone. After 500, only the soil and subtle patterns remain. Then imagine a satellite passing overhead in our time. With sensitive instruments, it catches a faint outline of the old grid. Not clear enough to be certain, but suggestive enough to make us pause. The canopy has both erased and recorded the event. If we let this experiment stretch further, we can imagine countless such clearings, scattered across thousands of kilometers. Each one may now be invisible to the eye, yet still influencing the soil, the plants, the quiet shapes of the land. When we bring these possibilities together, the forest becomes not only an environment, but also an archive written in a hidden script. And yet, we must end cautiously. For every pattern that looks deliberate, another may be random. For every shape that seems human-made, there is a natural process that could produce something similar. We cannot always tell. What we can say is that the Amazon canopy is not an empty cover. It is active, it is layered, it is both destroyer and preserver. It hides traces while keeping them safe, waiting for the right eyes, the right tools, the right moment to be noticed. In this soft interplay between concealment and survival, the forest reminds us that the past does not vanish, it simply grows quieter under the green silence. What if the ground beneath the Amazon is not only silent support for trees and rivers, but also a kind of memory, a quiet archive written in layers of soil? When we look at Earth, it often seems simple, just brown matter under our feet. Yet soil is not uniform. It is built slowly, from dust, from leaves, from ash, from the remains of countless lives. Each layer is like a page in a book, holding traces of what has passed before. In the Amazon, we sometimes meet a soil unlike others. It is darker, richer, more fertile. Locals call it terra preta, which simply means black earth. Unlike the thin, poor soils that wash away easily in tropical rains, this dark soil remains fertile for centuries. Its very persistence makes us pause. For soil to resist decay for so long, something unusual must have shaped it. Scientists believe that people long ago mixed charcoal, food scraps, broken pottery, and other materials into the ground. Charcoal is especially important. Unlike fresh wood that rots quickly, charcoal is stable. It holds nutrients, almost the way a sponge holds water, and it prevents them from washing away. The result is soil that stays fertile, generation after generation. To understand this, we might think of a small compost pile in a garden. When we add kitchen scraps and let them rest, the pile darkens, warms, and becomes richer. Something similar may have happened across large stretches of the Amazon, but on a scale we can hardly imagine. Now we can gently pause to note what we do not know. Not every dark patch of earth is human-made. Some places become rich through natural means, river floods deposit nutrients, certain plants enrich their surroundings, even lightning fires can create charcoal. The difficulty is telling when dark soil is natural and when it is the result of human care. This uncertainty matters. If most terra preta is artificial, it means people once shaped huge areas of the forest. If it is partly natural, then human presence may have been smaller. Absence of clear proof does not mean absence of human work. It only means our knowledge is limited, still unfolding. The soil itself speaks through indirect signs. In many places, pieces of pottery are mixed into the earth, sometimes small fragments, sometimes larger shards. These do not appear in untouched forest soils. There is also charcoal, finely spread through the ground, so old that it could only come from fires long past. The chemistry of terra preta also tells its story. Phosphorus, calcium, and other nutrients appear in concentrations too high to be natural. Even ancient pollen grains, preserved in the dark matrix, can reveal which plants once grew nearby. Each signal alone is faint, but together they whisper of lives once lived. Let us try a slow thought experiment. Imagine a small community on the edge of a river. People gather food, cook with fire, discard broken pots, clear patches for planting. Each day they throw ashes, scraps, and waste into the soil. At first, the ground looks no different. But year after year, the earth deepens, darkens, strengthens. After centuries, the soil has transformed into something that outlives its makers. Now imagine those people gone, whether they moved or disappeared. The forest returns, covering their homes and gardens. Yet beneath the roots, the dark earth remains. Centuries later, a researcher digs into the ground and finds it still rich, still fertile, holding fragments of pottery like scattered syllables of an old language. If we extend the thought, we can see how the forest itself now grows on this legacy. Trees with deep roots take nutrients from soil enriched by human hands long forgotten. The forest may appear natural, untouched, but its very vitality could be shaped by long ago cultivation. It is like music still playing after the musicians have left. Yet we must keep humility. Terra preta shows us presence, but not scale. Was it made by small groups in scattered places, or by large populations shaping whole regions? The answer is still hidden. What matters for us is the recognition that soil remembers more than we expect. It keeps traces patiently, waiting to be read. And when we read it, carefully, we find not certainty but possibility. A soil darker than its neighbors, richer than its surroundings, speaking in fragments of pottery, charcoal, and nutrients. It does not declare, but it suggests. It does not shout, but it persists. And in its persistence we find a gentle reminder: the past does not vanish completely. It lingers quietly in the ground beneath our feet. What if the rivers of the Amazon are more than waterways, more than channels for rain to return to the sea? What if they are also record keepers, scribes that have written quietly across the landscape for thousands of years? When we look at a river, we see movement, flowing water, restless and changing. But rivers also shape the land, they carve and they guide, and in their bends and lines they leave clues of what may have happened before. The Amazon basin is immense, crossed by countless rivers and streams, a web so dense that it is sometimes called a liquid forest. In this watery labyrinth, some patterns appear unusual. Certain channels are strikingly straight, stretching for kilometers without the gentle curves that water normally prefers. Others bend at sharp angles, too precise to feel accidental. It is in these details that the question arises: did people, long ago, guide the water, nudging its course into paths useful for travel or farming? Now we can pause a moment to see how rivers work on their own. Left untouched, they meander. A meander is the natural curve that forms when water erodes one bank and deposits soil on the other. Over centuries, these bends grow larger, looping into oxbows and lagoons. Straight lines are rare in such systems. They can happen, but usually only under special conditions. This is why, when straight channels appear, some researchers wonder if they were influenced by human hands. Perhaps ancient communities dug canals, shallow at first, then deepened by the water itself. Canals could connect rivers, provide transport, or drain land for planting. These possibilities remain uncertain, but they are worth considering. Evidence is limited. In many cases, modern deforestation or satellite imagery reveals shapes that might be canals or ancient ports. Yet the forest often closes again, erasing details. Sediment shifts, floods rearrange the land, and certainty slips away. We can only interpret cautiously from patterns that persist. Still, rivers speak another language, not only through shapes but also through layers of sediment. At their mouths and bends, deposits of pollen, charcoal, and soil chemicals gather year by year. Each layer is like a page of history, recording what plants grew, what fires burned, what materials washed downstream. If farming once spread along these banks, pollen from crops might still rest in the mud. If people cleared land with fire, charcoal flecks may be found. By reading these sediments, scientists trace long arcs of activity, though never with absolute clarity. Let us imagine a simple sequence. A group of people settles near a riverbank. To ease travel, they dig a channel, connecting one bend to another. Over time, water deepens it, and soon boats can pass. For generations, the canal is used, lined with fields and homes. Then life shifts, perhaps by migration or decline. The canal silts in, floods alter its edges, and plants return. 1,000 years later, the forest covers it completely. Only from above, through satellite or radar, does the line appear again, faint but undeniable, like a scar beneath the green. If we extend the thought further, we can imagine the rivers themselves as collaborators. Human intention and natural flow shaping each other, until it becomes impossible to say where one ends and the other begins. What seems natural may carry a human fingerprint. What seems artificial may have been guided by water itself. This blending of forces is delicate, and it reminds us why conclusions must be slow and tentative. For every straight channel that suggests human design, there may be a natural explanation. For every unusual bend that feels like a harbor, there may be coincidence. What matters is not to rush, but to listen to the river's layered voices. And so we rest on a cautious note. The rivers of the Amazon are restless and patient at once. They carve, they erase, they preserve. In their patterns we may glimpse signs of ancient presence, though never with certainty. They are storytellers, but their language is soft, written in currents and mud. When we follow their lines, we are reminded that memory can flow as well as remain still, and that even the water itself may hold quiet traces of lives once lived along its banks. What if the forest canopy, that endless roof of green stretching for thousands of kilometers, is not only a shelter for life but also a gentle screen hiding patterns we were not meant to notice at first glance. From above it looks uniform, a rolling ocean of treetops without interruption. Yet when scientists began to look beneath the leaves with tools that can sense through vegetation, shapes appeared that seemed too regular, too geometric, to be the work of chance. We now find ourselves in the scale of vast landscapes, looking not at single trees but at whole regions, and in the scale of time that extends centuries back, where memory fades yet some imprints endure. To understand how these discoveries are made, we may pause and explain. The human eye cannot pierce the canopy. From the ground, vision is blocked by trunks, branches, vines. From the sky, all we see are crowns of trees. But certain technologies, like radar or LiDAR, send signals downward that can filter through gaps and bounce back from the ground itself. By gathering these signals, computers build maps of hidden terrain. What they reveal is not always clear, but sometimes patterns emerge: long straight lines, circles, rectangles, even grids. Nature favors irregularity, soft curves, random scattering. Straightness and precise angles often hint at human influence. But here we must soften our step. Not every line is a road. Not every circle is a plaza. Erosion, roots, and natural landforms can mimic design. Our task is to remain cautious, to treat each shape not as proof but as suggestion. The language of these traces is subtle. A line through the canopy might mark an old causeway, a raised path that once connected settlements. A square outline could hint at an enclosure, maybe for ceremonies, maybe for defense. Concentric circles might indicate earthworks where people gathered. None of these features rise like stone pyramids or walls. They are shallow, low, nearly erased. And yet their persistence is remarkable, still visible under centuries of forest growth. We can think of it like faint pencil marks under layers of paint, hidden, but still there if we know how to look. Now let us pause for a quiet thought experiment. Imagine people building in the forest long ago. They dig ditches, raise small embankments, clear areas for gathering. To them it is ordinary work, paths and plazas to shape daily life. Then centuries pass. The forest grows back, trees root themselves in the old ditches, vines coil across the plazas. To anyone walking there later, nothing unusual appears. Only from the sky, centuries later, when instruments measure tiny differences in elevation, does the hidden geometry show itself again. The forest has both erased and preserved their work. If we extend this thought, we might imagine networks of such shapes, connected across distances. Each line or circle becomes a node in a forgotten pattern. The possibility arises that what we see today as isolated fragments were once parts of something larger, more continuous. But the truth is we cannot know with certainty. Many shapes remain unexplored on the ground. Some may vanish before they are studied, as farming and logging remove the forest cover. The canopy reveals reluctantly, and only in pieces. Yet even these pieces remind us that absence of visible ruins does not equal absence of past life. The forest canopy has hidden more than it has shown. At the same time, it protects. Beneath its cover, soil is shielded from direct sun, from harsh winds. Remains of pottery, charcoal, and earthworks survive better than they might in open ground. Concealment and preservation walk together, hand in hand. And so we rest on a quiet conclusion. The canopy is both veil and guardian. It hides lines and circles, grids and roads, but it also allows them to remain, waiting for discovery. What we see through it are only hints, whispers of past order. We do not yet know the full meaning, and perhaps we never will. But by listening patiently to these faint signals, we are reminded that the forest is not empty. It is layered, and in its layers it holds more than meets the eye. What if the cities that may once have existed in the Amazon were not built of stone and iron, but of wood, clay, and living plants? When we imagine cities, our minds often drift to images of towers, walls, and plazas carved in durable materials. But in the rainforest, stone is scarce, and wood is abundant. Here, the architecture of life would have been woven directly from the forest itself. Time passes differently for such materials. Stone can endure for millennia, but wood dissolves quickly in the humid air, and clay, unless burned hard, crumbles back into earth. This is why, if cities were here, they have left no grand ruins for us to see. Instead, they may have dissolved almost completely, becoming part of the soil and the forest that now covers them. Yet absence of monuments is not absence of memory. The traces are quieter, less obvious, but still present in the language of the land. Now we may pause for a moment to think of how such cities could have functioned. Imagine houses raised on wooden stilts to protect from floods. Imagine walls of woven palm leaves, roofs thatched with grasses, floors made of hardened earth. These would be practical, light, and adapted to the climate. They would also vanish quickly when abandoned. Within a few decades, termites, rain, and roots would erase nearly every visible sign. What would remain are the things less easily broken down: the reshaped soil, the ditches, the mounds, the altered vegetation. And this is where our attention shifts. Instead of monuments of stone, we must read monuments of soil. The raised platforms, still visible as gentle hills. The earthworks, forming patterns beneath the canopy. The distribution of plants, suggesting gardens and orchards. Each of these is a trace, not of walls that resisted time, but of structures that chose to blend with it. The limitations of our knowledge are clear. Without stone, we cannot reconstruct exact layouts. Without preserved timber, we cannot know the details of design. What we have are shadows, indirect signs, pieces of a puzzle whose image is uncertain. And yet, these shadows align with patterns known elsewhere. In many parts of the world, people built great settlements without durable stone. In Southeast Asia, wooden palaces and temples once stood where only earth mounds now remain. In North America, large towns of wood and clay existed, but today they are seen only through the patterns of post holes in the soil. These comparisons remind us that cities need not leave towering ruins to be real. They can be networks of homes and gardens spread out, interwoven with their environment, visible only if we learn how to read the land itself. Now let us imagine, softly, a sequence. A community grows over generations. Houses of wood stand close together, linked by paths. Fields and orchards spread nearby, enriched by dark soil. Fires burn in hearths, smoke rises into the canopy, and voices fill the air. Then life shifts. The community moves, declines, or changes. The houses collapse, roofs fall, poles rot, the forest returns. Within 50 years, almost nothing is visible. Within 200, the ground looks untouched. Yet beneath the trees, the soil is still richer than its neighbors. A few mounds still lift the earth a meter higher than the plain. Certain clusters of fruit trees stand where they were once planted. The city is gone, yet its shape remains, hidden but not erased. If we take this thought further, we see how a forest of today may itself be shaped by long-vanished cities. Some of the density of useful plants could be inheritance. Some of the fertility of the soil could be legacy. The forest may not be purely wild, but partly cultural, carrying echoes of human care that have blended back into nature. This possibility does not change the forest's majesty, but it deepens it, reminding us of how entwined human and natural histories can be. And so we reach a gentle pause. Cities of wood and clay would leave little behind, yet they may still speak in subtler ways, in soil, in patterns, in plants. Their silence does not mean they never existed. It means they chose a different path into memory, one that blends rather than resists. If we listen closely, the forest whispers both of life that thrives now and of lives that once built within it, leaving only soft traces for us to follow. What if the forest that seems so empty of people today once carried the weight of millions of lives? When we think of population, we often imagine numbers on paper, neat rows of figures. But in the past, people themselves were the numbers, moving, planting, cooking, leaving traces that still rest in the ground. The Amazon, vast and humid, was long thought to be too poor in soil and too harsh in climate to support large populations. Yet evidence collected slowly over the years has suggested another possibility, one where far more people lived here than we once assumed. Now we pause in the scale of centuries, not to count individuals one by one, but to sense the density of life across landscapes. In modern terms, we might call it demographic weight, But here it is more like a rhythm: fields cleared, crops planted, homes built, all repeating across generations. How can we guess at numbers that are no longer visible? We look for indirect signals. One of the clearest is the presence of terra preta, the dark earth enriched by human activity. Its spread across thousands of square kilometers suggests that people lived, worked, and cultivated intensively. Shards of pottery embedded in these soils speak of countless vessels made, used, broken, and discarded. When such traces are widespread, they hint at a population not of scattered families, but of communities numbering in the thousands and tens of thousands. Now we may pause to note the limits. Numbers derived from soil patches and fragments are not precise. A large deposit of dark earth could mean many people lived there for a short time, or fewer people lived there for centuries. The difference matters, but the traces alone cannot always tell. This is why estimates of ancient Amazon populations vary widely, from a few million to many millions. What unites them is not certainty but the recognition that life here was likely more abundant than once believed. Another language of traces comes from geometry carved into the earth. Circles, squares, ditches, and raised fields, sometimes stretching for kilometers, imply planning and labor. Such works are rarely the effort of a few families. They suggest organized groups, cooperating on a scale that requires larger populations. Still, the shapes do not tell us exact counts. They only whisper of the human energy once present. Let us imagine, slowly, what such a population might have looked like. Picture a network of villages, each with hundreds of residents. They are linked by paths or waterways, exchanging goods, stories, and traditions. Along the rivers, larger centers gather more people, perhaps thousands, forming nodes in a living web. Fields of manioc and maize stretch outward, orchards of fruit trees cluster nearby, and fishing grounds in the rivers supply protein. Day after day, this cycle supports a large population. Then, imagine a shift. Disease arrives, or climate changes, or social structures weaken. The numbers dwindle. Fields lie fallow, houses collapse, paths close. Within a few generations, the population has decreased sharply. The forest spreads back, covering not only the villages but also the memory of how many people once walked there. 1,000 years later, we look and see only trees, and we wonder if anyone lived here at all. Now, with careful eyes, we notice the fragments, the dark soils, the pottery, the geometric shapes, and we realize that silence is not emptiness. The traces show us that life once pulsed strongly here, even if we cannot fix the exact numbers. We must be careful not to overstate. The Amazon may not have been filled with continuous cities as we think of them today. It may have been more like a tapestry of settlements, some small, some larger, connected loosely into regional systems. Populations may have fluctuated with seasons, with floods, with shifts in climate. What matters is not the precise total, but the recognition that this was a humanized landscape, one shaped by many hands over long stretches of time. And so we end gently. The echoes of population remain not in census records, but in soils, shards, and shapes. The forest does not tell us the numbers directly. It only lets us sense the scale through scattered signals. These signals are faint but persistent, reminding us that the Amazon we see today, vast and green, may once have held far more human life than silence alone suggests. What if time itself is the most powerful force shaping the memory of the Amazon, a slow and patient hand that smooths edges, breaks down structures, and allows silence to grow where life once was? When we look at ruins elsewhere in the world, we see stone walls and carvings that resist centuries. But here, in the deep humidity of the rainforest, time acts differently. It does not preserve, it absorbs. Wood decays quickly, clay dissolves back into mud, even metal corrodes faster in the constant damp. Within a few decades, what was once a home can vanish into the soil. Within a few centuries, even outlines are difficult to find. And yet traces remain. Now let us pause to see how this erasure works. In the Amazon, the air is moist, the ground is alive with insects and fungi, and roots spread everywhere. A wooden beam left in such conditions does not last long. It is consumed, broken down into nutrients, feeding the forest itself. Clay walls, unless carefully fired, soften and crumble in the rain. What remains are often the negative spaces, the absence of material rather than its presence. Hollows where posts once stood, darkened soils where hearths once burned. This is why archaeologists here often work not with towering ruins but with subtle shifts in soil and land. The absence of visible ruins should not confuse us into thinking nothing existed. It only means that time has worked more completely here. But before we drift too far, we should also recognize that time preserves in its own way. Though structures vanish, soil archives remain. Charcoal particles are stable, pottery fragments endure, chemical signatures in the earth resist the wash of rain. In this sense, time erases one layer while protecting another. It is less like a flood sweeping everything away, and more like a forest floor that covers gently, leaving some traces beneath. The language of these traces is delicate. A darker patch of soil, a scatter of ceramics, a mound where the ground rises just slightly, all of these are signals. In sediments at river mouths, layers of pollen remain, showing what plants once dominated the land. In these tiny grains of pollen we can read when forests were cleared, when crops were planted, when fire was used. Each marker is faint, but together they speak across centuries. Now we can imagine, softly, a thought experiment. Picture a village built along a riverbank. For decades it thrives, houses of wood, gardens of manioc, fires glowing at night. Then life shifts. The people move, or decline, or fade. Within 20 years, the houses collapse, roofs rot, fields are overgrown. Within 50 years, the forest has reclaimed the site entirely. A passerby would see only trees. Yet beneath, the soil is darker, flecks of charcoal remain, fragments of broken pottery are buried. Now, let the centuries pass. Floods deposit new sediments, roots weave into the soil, the canopy thickens. The village is gone to the eye, but its quiet signature rests in the earth. If, far in the future, someone digs carefully, they find those signals and reconstruct a shadow of the life once lived there. If we stretch this thought further, we realize how much the scale of time influences what is visible to us now. A city of stone may stand for millennia. A city of wood and earth may last only in fragments. This does not make one more real than the other. It only changes the way we must look. We cannot expect grand ruins in the Amazon, but we can expect subtle, patient traces. And here we must be cautious. Time not only erases, it also confuses. Natural processes can mimic human ones. A mound could be a natural hill. A dark patch of soil could be the result of plant growth. The line between natural and cultural is not always sharp. This is why conclusions must remain open, tentative, waiting for more layers of evidence. And so we rest with a gentle recognition. Time's slow hand has erased much of what may once have been built in the Amazon, but it has not erased everything. It has left signals quiet enough to be overlooked, but strong enough to persist. In the rhythm of decay and preservation, we are reminded that memory in the forest is not absent, only hidden beneath centuries of growth. To see it, we must learn to read time not as destruction, but as a long and patient transformation. What if the Amazon is not an exception but part of a larger story, one that repeats across continents, where great settlements rise, flourish, and then sink quietly back into the embrace of nature? When we step outside this forest in our minds and look toward other regions, we find examples that help us imagine what might have happened here. The comparisons do not prove, but they suggest. They offer us patterns, reminders that cities can vanish without leaving the kinds of ruins we are accustomed to. Let us pause first with Angkor, in Cambodia. Once a thriving center of temples, roads, and canals, it was hidden for centuries beneath thick jungle. From the air, little was seen but trees. Only when explorers cleared paths did they find that the forest itself had been growing over a vast human-made landscape. Angkor shows us how a city of wood and stone can dissolve into greenery, its memory held not in ruins alone but in moats, dikes, and alignments still visible in the land. Now we move softly to North America, to Cahokia, near the Mississippi River. This city, built not of stone towers but of earthen mounds, was once home to tens of thousands. Today the mounds remain, grass-covered and quiet, while the wooden buildings that filled them are gone. The earth remembers, even when the structures themselves vanish. This teaches us that soil can be architecture's last refuge, its final line of survival. If we pause further, we may note parallels in Africa, in the rainforests around the Congo, where traditions speak of great towns swallowed by time, though few traces remain visible. Or in the Pacific Islands, where wooden settlements left behind only subtle reshaping of the land. These examples remind us that the absence of stone does not mean the absence of urban life. Stone is a privilege of geology, not a requirement of civilization. What limits us is the fragmentary nature of these comparisons. Each region has its own climate, its own soil, its own history. Angkor had monumental stone temples. Cahokia left vast earth mounds. The Amazon may have had neither in abundance, or may have expressed its cities differently. We cannot simply copy one model onto another. But we can use them as gentle mirrors, to show us what is possible, what is not impossible. The language of traces here is shared. Earthworks, ditches, mounds, canals, changes in vegetation, all appear across different parts of the world. When we see similar patterns in the Amazon, it becomes easier to imagine that they too may be signs of organized life. Still, caution must remain. Similarity does not always mean connection. Natural processes can create patterns that look alike. A ditch in the forest could be a streambed, not a canal. A mound could be a natural rise, not a plaza. This is why comparisons must guide imagination but not replace careful evidence. Now let us try a quiet thought experiment. Suppose we look at Angkor before it was rediscovered. Imagine flying over dense jungle in the 19th century, seeing only trees, unaware of the vast city beneath. Without excavation, without maps, we might conclude nothing was there. The forest would seem eternal. Yet it was not. Now apply this vision to the Amazon. We fly above, we see only green. But perhaps, hidden beneath, there are alignments, mounds, canals, even whole webs of settlements. Not visible to the eye, but waiting in soil and sediment. If we extend this thought further, we may recognize a deeper rhythm, that human life often expands into landscapes, reshapes them, and then withdraws, leaving the land to cover and absorb. Nature reclaims, but does not always erase fully. Patterns survive for those who learn to see them. And so we close gently. The Amazon may or may not have mirrored Angkor or Cahokia. But the existence of such places reminds us to be open. The forest is not too strong for people, nor people too fragile for the forest. The past has shown us that cities can rise in jungles, in plains, in river valleys, and later vanish almost without trace. This knowledge widens our sense of possibility, allowing us to imagine the Amazon not as a singular puzzle, but as part of a larger, repeating story of life, growth, and quiet return to earth. What if fire, usually thought of as a force of destruction, was in the Amazon also a tool of creation, a quiet architect shaping the soil and leaving traces that still remain today? Fire is not only flame, it is also transformation. When wood burns slowly and incompletely, it leaves charcoal, a material resistant to decay. In the humid forest, where almost everything rots quickly, charcoal can persist for centuries, even millennia. And so fire, though brief in its moment, becomes long-lived in its traces. Let us pause here for a moment to think of how people may have used it. In many parts of the world, fire has been a companion to farming. It clears land, releases nutrients, and prepares the soil for planting. In the Amazon, where natural soil is often poor, fire may have been a way to enrich the ground. The charcoal left behind holds nutrients the way a clay pot holds water. It prevents them from washing away in heavy rains. When people returned again and again to the same place, adding more layers of ash and charcoal, the soil grew darker and more fertile. This is the basis of what we call terra preta, the black earth that survives as a marker of human presence. But before we go too far, we must step back. Not all fire is human-made. Lightning strikes can ignite trees, and dry seasons can carry flames across patches of forest. Natural fire also leaves charcoal in the soil. The challenge is to distinguish between what nature has done alone and what people once guided. patterns offer hints. Charcoal found with pottery shards, for example, is more likely to reflect human activity. Charcoal spread widely in fertile soil, rather than in isolated patches, also suggests deliberate burning. Still, we cannot always be certain. The absence of proof is not proof of absence. The language of fire is written in fine particles. Tiny flecks of charcoal rest in sediments, some so small they can only be seen under a microscope. They are light, black markers scattered through the soil. In river deposits, layers of charcoal tell of past burning, year after year. These layers are like quiet lines in a diary, showing when landscapes were cleared and when they were left alone. By counting and dating them, scientists can trace rhythms of fire over centuries. And in those rhythms we sometimes glimpse human hands. Now let us imagine, gently, a sequence. A group of people clears a patch of forest. They burn wood, not to destroy but to prepare the ground. Ash and charcoal sink into the soil. They plant crops, harvest them, and burn again the following season. Over decades, the soil grows richer, darker, more stable. Centuries pass. The people move on. The forest returns. To the eye, all seems untouched. But beneath the roots, layers of charcoal remain. Hundreds of years later, someone digs and finds them, tiny black flecks whispering of forgotten fires. If we extend this thought, we can imagine how widespread such practices might have been. If many groups across the basin use fire in this way, the combined effect could be vast, transforming not only patches but entire regions of soil. The forest we see today might still carry the legacy of those fires, its richness in certain areas tied to human care long ago. But again we soften our step. We cannot yet say how much was human and how much natural. Fire's traces do not tell us purpose, they only show presence. We must read them carefully, alongside other signs, to avoid seeing patterns where none were intended. And so we arrive at a gentle recognition. Fire, often feared, may here have been a quiet partner. Its traces are not dramatic ruins but fine particles hidden in earth and river. They remind us that even brief acts can leave long shadows, and that what seems destructive may, in the long rhythm of time, be a form of preservation. In the Amazon, the memory of fire is not in smoke or flame, but in soil, in sediment, in black whispers that endure beneath the green silence. What if the dark earth scattered across the Amazon, the mysterious terra preta, is not simply a soil but a message left behind, a patient inscription of human care across centuries? Unlike ordinary soils of the rainforest, thin and quickly exhausted, this black earth endures. It resists the heavy rains, it stays fertile, and it continues to nourish plants long after those who shaped it are gone. When we step back and look at its scale, we see patches that stretch not just meters but kilometers, often appearing near rivers, on bluffs, in places where people might once have gathered. The soil itself seems almost unnatural in its richness, a garden preserved beneath a forest. To understand why it is unusual, we can pause for a simple comparison. Normal Amazon soil is like a shallow plate. It holds nutrients for a short time, but the rains wash them away. Terra preta is more like a deep bowl. Its charcoal particles act like tiny sponges, holding nutrients close, preventing them from disappearing. When fragments of broken pottery, fish bones, and plant remains mix in, the soil becomes even richer. Over time, it turns into a living archive, one that can sustain crops again and again. But we must not rush to certainty. We do not yet know how deliberate the process was. Did people intentionally create this fertile soil, carefully managing fire and waste, or did it arise slowly as a byproduct of daily life? Ashes scattered from hearths, scraps left in middens, compost built unconsciously. Perhaps it was both. The truth may be varied, depending on time and place. And here lies the humility we must keep. Not all dark soil means ancient farms, and not every fertile patch is evidence of large populations. Still, its persistence is remarkable. Even after hundreds of years, terra preta keeps its fertility. In some modern places, farmers seek it out, preferring it to the ordinary ground around. This endurance itself is a form of testimony. Few human-made things in the Amazon last so long. Now we can listen to the language of its traces. Chemical analysis reveals higher levels of phosphorus, calcium, and other nutrients than in surrounding soils. Charcoal particles, stable and light, remain in the matrix. Small shards of ceramics are often found, silent remnants of cooking pots broken and discarded. Even microscopic remains, pollen grains, phytoliths made of silica, show what plants once grew nearby. Together, these signals suggest human activity woven into the very structure of the earth. Let us imagine, slowly, a thought sequence. Picture a settlement by the river. Families cook, eat, and discard their waste nearby. Ash from hearths is scattered, bones are thrown into pits, pottery breaks and mixes with the dirt. At first the soil looks unchanged. Decades pass. Generations repeat the same acts. The earth grows darker, more fertile. Gardens are planted, crops grow taller, fruit trees thrive. The soil becomes more than ground, it becomes a partner in life. Now imagine centuries later. The people have moved on. The forest returns, covering the gardens, swallowing the paths. But the dark soil remains. It feeds the new trees, it shapes the vegetation, it holds fragments of pottery as a whisper of what came before. And if we extend this thought even further, we might see how such soil could spread across vast areas. Many communities, over long stretches of time, each leaving their own fertile patches. Together, they could form a mosaic of human influence across the basin. Not a single city, but a network of enriched lands, each one carrying memory in its darkened earth. But we must pause again with care. The presence of terra preta tells us that people lived here, but not exactly how many, or how they organized themselves. A large patch might mean a dense settlement, or a smaller group living there for centuries. Its meaning shifts depending on scale. This uncertainty is not weakness, it is a reminder that the soil speaks in half phrases, not in full sentences. And so we come to a gentle recognition. Terra preta is both puzzle and legacy. It shows us that humans and forests once interacted deeply, not only taking but also giving back. It endures where wood and clay have disappeared, carrying memories silently in its grains. It does not declare the existence of megacities, nor does it deny them. It rests in between, a quiet witness, inviting us to imagine, to consider, and to remain open to possibilities hidden beneath the green. What if the long, straight lines that sometimes appear beneath the Amazon canopy are not accidents of nature but traces of roads, paths once connecting places now hidden under trees? In most landscapes, rivers curve, forests scatter, and hills rise irregularly. Straightness is rare. Yet from the air and through satellite eyes, faint lines cut across the green, stretching for kilometers. They do not follow the easy curves of rivers or the unpredictable growth of vegetation. Instead, they hint at direction, at intention, as though people once drew paths into the forest, not for a day or a season, but for generations. We now rest in the scale of distance, where settlements may not be isolated but linked, each one part of a wider web. Roads are more than ground to walk upon. They are connections, threads that tie one community to another. To clear and maintain them requires labor, and to repeat that labor year after year requires organization. In this sense, the very possibility of roads in the Amazon opens the thought of coordinated life. Yet here, as always, we must soften our step. Not every line is a road. Some may be ancient streambeds, ridges, or natural clearings. The challenge is to distinguish between chance and choice. A line visible from the air may be suggestive, but until studied on the ground, it remains uncertain. Absence of proof is not proof of absence. Still, the language of these lines speaks quietly. In places where they have been studied, raised causeways appear, paths built slightly above the swampy ground, solid enough to allow movement even during floods. Other lines seem to connect clusters of earthworks, suggesting travel or exchange. In some regions, parallel lines have been found, as if marking the edges of broader avenues. Each trace is faint, but together they whisper of networks that once stretched across the forest floor. Now let us imagine, gently, a sequence. A village grows on the bank of a river. People need to reach another village 2 days' walk away. They begin to clear a path, removing brush, cutting small trees. Over time, the path becomes worn, wider, more permanent. They raise its level slightly, to keep it dry in rainy seasons. For generations, people walk this road, carrying food, pottery, tools, stories. The road becomes not only a route but a memory, a part of daily rhythm. Then, centuries later, the village declines. The road is no longer used. The forest moves back, roots and vines closing the way. To the eye, it vanishes. But from above, under the canopy, a faint line remains, still marking where people once walked. If we extend this thought, we may see the forest crisscrossed with such lines, a web connecting clearings, gardens, and settlements. Perhaps some roads led to ceremonial centers, others to fields, others to rivers. The network would not have been like modern highways, wide and paved, but more like threads woven softly into the landscape. Now we must pause. The scale of such networks is unknown. Some could have connected only a few nearby places. Others may have stretched for long distances. We cannot know how many people walked them, how often, or for what purposes. What we have are faint outlines, suggestions of direction, but not the full story. And yet, even these outlines remind us that connection may have been as important as settlement. A road is never only about place, it is about relation. It is a sign that people looked outward, not only inward, that they wished to reach and be reached. And so we end with a gentle recognition. The straight lines beneath the forest may or may not be roads. But their very possibility opens our sense of what life in the Amazon once was. Not isolated, not static, but linked, moving, connected. Whether the traces we see are few or many, certain or uncertain, they suggest that beneath the silence of the canopy, memory flows not only in soil and rivers but also in the faint directions left by those who once walked together. What if the circles, squares, and straight lines found beneath the Amazon canopy are not accidents of erosion but quiet echoes of geometry shaped by human hands? Nature tends toward curves, irregular edges, and scattered patterns. Yet scattered across the forest we find earthworks that suggest intention, ditches and embankments forming precise angles, enclosures built in shapes that feel deliberate. These are not grand stone walls or pyramids. They are shallow impressions, barely rising above the soil, but their regularity makes us pause. When we think of geometry, we think of order. A circle drawn in the ground, repeated with precision, is rarely an accident. A square, aligned with cardinal directions, suggests planning. In some parts of the Amazon, satellite images and fieldwork have revealed hundreds of such figures, some stretching for hundreds of meters. From above, they resemble quiet signatures across the land, as though the earth itself still remembers the lines once carved into it. Now we can pause to see how such features might have been made. People could have dug ditches, piling the soil outward to create raised banks. Over time, these banks grew covered with grass or forest, but the underlying shape endured. A circle might have enclosed a gathering space. A square could have marked a settlement, a boundary, or a place of ceremony. We do not know the exact purpose, and perhaps each figure had a different one. What unites them is their persistence. Even as centuries pass, the geometry remains visible, faint but steady. But we must also recognize the limits. Not all shapes we see from above are human. Some may be natural ridges or the result of water flow. Erosion can mimic lines, and tree patterns can create illusions. The challenge is to separate what is planned from what is chance. Archaeologists confirm some features as human-made, but many others remain uncertain. We must rest in this uncertainty, letting possibility be enough without forcing it into certainty. Now let us linger with the language of traces. These earthworks speak through form rather than material. No stones remain, no carvings, only the arrangement of soil. Yet the very act of reshaping earth leaves a durable imprint. Soil chemistry can shift where fires once burned. Pollen in nearby sediments can reveal what plants were grown or cleared. Even the distribution of forests today sometimes reflects the ancient outlines of these figures, as certain plants cluster along the old embankments. Together, these quiet signals form a subtle but persistent archive. Imagine, softly, a thought sequence. A group of people gathers to mark a place. They dig a wide circle into the earth, piling soil carefully, leaving an open space within. Perhaps it is used for ritual, or for markets, or simply for meeting. For decades, the community gathers there. Then time passes. The place is abandoned. Forest roots take hold, rains soften the banks, animals cross freely. A century later, the clearing has closed, but the circle remains as a faint ridge. 1,000 years later, we look from the air and still see its outline, a ghost of geometry beneath the green. If we extend the thought, we can imagine networks of such figures, connected by roads or rivers, forming a patterned landscape. Each shape might have marked identity, belonging, or connection. Together, they suggest that people here once cared not only for survival but also for order, for meaning, for the expression of shape. Still, we cannot know the full story. A circle could have been a gathering place, or simply a corral. A square could have been ceremonial, or practical. We must resist the urge to impose our own interpretations too firmly. Instead, we accept that the earth holds shapes whose meanings are partly lost, partly preserved. And so we come to a quiet recognition. The geometry of earthworks in the Amazon is not loud. It does not tower or glitter. It hums softly beneath the forest, reminding us that human presence was once here, shaping soil with purpose. Whether these figures were cities, villages, or ceremonial grounds, they carry forward a message of intention. They tell us that even in places where wood and clay dissolve, form can remain. Circles and squares, traced into the land, continue to whisper across centuries, gentle reminders of lives once lived, and choices once made, in the heart of the green silence. What if the forest itself is not only a wild expanse but also a living memory of choices made long ago? Trees can act as quiet witnesses. Some species grow in densities that are unusual, appearing in clusters far richer than what nature alone would typically create. These clusters may be signals of past planting, of human hands guiding what would thrive in certain places. When we step back and look at the Amazon, we see not only diversity but also patterns, and in those patterns we may sense echoes of cultivation. Now we pause to understand how this might work. Many forest plants, such as Brazil nut trees or certain fruit-bearing palms, do not easily spread on their own across wide distances. Their seeds are heavy, sometimes requiring people to carry them, plant them, or encourage their growth. If today we find groves of such trees far from their natural centers, it may hint that long ago people tended them. In this sense, the forest is both natural and cultural, shaped partly by its own cycles and partly by the care of humans. Yet we must move carefully. Animal dispersal can also explain some clusters. Birds, monkeys, and rodents carry seeds far from their source, creating concentrations that are not the work of people. Climate shifts can favor certain species in certain periods. To distinguish between human-guided groves and natural ones is difficult. The line is faint, the signals ambiguous. But absence of certainty does not erase the possibility that human choices still ripple through the vegetation we see today. The language of these plant archives is subtle. We find it not in carved symbols but in densities and distributions. Statistical studies show that useful plants appear more often than chance alone would predict, especially near ancient earthworks and dark soils. Pollen preserved in sediments reveals shifts in vegetation over centuries, sometimes showing sudden increases in crops or fruit trees. Even DNA studies of plant populations suggest patterns of selection, where certain varieties spread in ways linked to human activity. Each trace is indirect, but together they whisper of long companionship between people and plants. Now let us imagine, softly, a sequence. A community settles along a river. They plant Brazil nut trees nearby, knowing it will take decades before they bear fruit. They cultivate palms for oil, bananas for food, cassava in fields. Generations pass. The trees mature, orchards grow, the forest around them becomes interwoven with human gardens. Then the community fades or moves. The forest closes in, swallowing the clearings. Yet the planted trees remain, tall and enduring, living longer than the homes and paths. Centuries later, someone walks the forest and finds a dense grove of nut trees. To the eye it seems natural, but in truth it is a living memory, a garden whose makers are long gone. If we stretch this thought further, we see how the Amazon may itself be a mosaic of such inheritances. Clusters of fruit and nut trees, distributed across vast distances, could be remnants of ancient agroforestry, a kind of farming that blends with forests rather than replaces it. In this vision, the Amazon is not untouched wilderness but a landscape partly shaped by human care. Still, we must return to humility. Not every grove is a legacy of planting. Not every cluster is a human mark. Our tools are improving, but they cannot always separate chance from intention. What remains important is the possibility itself, that the forest may be carrying within it long-lived signs of past choices, woven so deeply into its fabric that they appear natural. And so we reach a gentle pause. Plants are more than food or shade, they are archives. They grow slowly, they endure, they spread in patterns that remember the hands that once tended them. The Amazon, seen this way, is not only a wild expanse but also a layered garden, a living palimpsest where the present forest grows upon the quiet work of those who came before. It reminds us that traces of human presence may be alive, not only buried, and that memory can bloom in leaves as much as in soil. What if the traces we see in the Amazon are not as clear as they seem, and what if the silence we meet there is as important as the signals themselves? Evidence is fragile in this landscape. Wood dissolves, clay crumbles, roots disturb what was once built. When we look for the past here, we are not reading carved stones or monumental walls. We are reading faint changes in soil, subtle alignments in vegetation, and fragments scattered almost invisibly across the ground. To read such traces is like trying to follow the outline of a drawing half erased. Now we can pause for a moment to reflect on what we mean when we say, limits of evidence. In science, absence of proof is not proof of absence. If we do not find ruins, it does not mean none existed. It may only mean they were made of materials that do not endure, or that time has worked more completely here than in other places. The Amazon is a place where nature reclaims faster than almost anywhere else. Within decades, even large clearings can be swallowed by the forest. Within centuries, villages may leave almost nothing visible. This is why conclusions here must be gentle, tentative, open-ended. The language of traces is complex. For example, terra preta, the dark earth enriched by people, is found in many regions. Yet its distribution does not tell us exact numbers, or exact ways of life. A dense patch of this soil may signal a large settlement, or a smaller group living in one place for generations. Both leave similar marks. Likewise, geometric earthworks suggest planning, but their purpose, whether ceremonial, defensive, or practical, remains uncertain. Each clue whispers, but none speak loudly. We must assemble them with care, without forcing them to form a picture too sharp. Let us try a small thought experiment. Imagine standing in the forest now, searching for signs of the past. The ground beneath your feet holds dark soil, but you cannot know if it came from a few centuries of farming or from a much larger system. You notice a raised mound, but it could be an ancient platform, or simply a natural rise. You find a piece of pottery, but you cannot know if it belonged to a thriving settlement or a lone traveler. At each step you meet uncertainty. Now imagine extending this over thousands of kilometers. The Amazon becomes a mosaic of signals, some strong, some faint, many ambiguous. What we see is not a clear picture but a blurred tapestry, where interpretation shifts depending on how we look. This uncertainty is not a failure. It is part of the nature of deep time. We must accept that some answers remain hidden, that some questions have no final resolution. This does not lessen the value of the traces we find. Instead, it reminds us to tread softly, to remain open to multiple possibilities. The forest is not empty of history, but neither is it a book we can read easily. It is more like a palimpsest, a page written over many times, where only fragments of older writing remain. And so we arrive at a gentle pause. The limits of evidence in the Amazon are not obstacles but conditions of study. They remind us to balance imagination with caution, possibility with humility. The soil, the trees, the rivers, they speak in halftones, not in declarations. What they tell us is never complete, but it is enough to remind us that life here was once more complex than silence suggests. The lack of certainty does not erase the past. It simply leaves space for us to wonder, to imagine, and to listen more carefully to the quiet traces still present beneath the green. What if the cities of the Amazon, if they ever existed, were not cities in the way we usually imagine them, but something softer, more interwoven with the forest itself? Our minds often picture megacities as dense clusters of stone and metal, towers rising above crowded streets. But here, in the deep green basin, materials and rhythms were different. Wood and clay, plants and earth, these would have been the building blocks. A settlement would not fight against the forest, but breathe with it. It may not have had sharp boundaries, but rather blended gradually into gardens, orchards, and rivers. Now we may pause to consider how such a city could have worked. Instead of a single dense center, life may have been spread out across clusters of villages. Each cluster connected by paths or waterways, forming a network rather than a mass. Fields of manioc and maize might have stretched along the edges. Orchards of fruit and nut trees could have shaded the outskirts. Homes, raised lightly on stilts, would have merged almost invisibly into the greenery. In this vision, the city is not a fortress but a tapestry, a woven pattern of human and natural life. But here we must step carefully. Archaeology has given us glimpses of this pattern, yet not the full image. The absence of stone walls leaves us with few strong outlines. What remains are earthworks, dark soils, and unusual plant distributions. These signs hint at planning, but they do not tell us scale with certainty. Was the Amazon home to a continuous urban web, or to smaller clusters spread loosely across space? We cannot yet know. Absence of grand ruins does not mean absence of complex life, but it also does not guarantee vast cities. The language of traces here is indirect. Terra preta spreads across wide areas, suggesting long-term cultivation. Straight causeways appear, linking sites, as if travel was organized. Geometric enclosures dot the land, too regular to be random. Even the forest itself seems to carry memory, with useful trees appearing more often near these old soils. Together, these signals form the outline of a settlement system unlike the stone cities of the Old World. Now let us try a gentle thought experiment. Imagine walking through such a city 500 years ago. There is no wall to mark where it begins. Instead, you notice more fruit trees, more clearings, the sound of people. Houses are built of palm wood and leaves, light enough to rise quickly, yet destined to dissolve back into soil. Fires burn in hearths, enriching the ground below. Paths stretch outward, leading to other clusters. From above, the city is not a single dot but a network, spreading outward like a constellation of stars, each shining softly yet connected by invisible lines. Now let centuries pass. The people move or decline. The houses rot, the orchards go wild, the fields return to forest. From the ground, almost nothing remains. But from the sky, faint shapes linger, lines of roads, circles of earth, patches of soil darker than their surroundings. The constellation still glows, but only faintly, only for those who know how to look. If we extend this thought further, we might see the Amazon itself as a hybrid landscape, not wilderness alone, not city alone, but a blend. A space where human and forest histories overlap so deeply that they cannot be separated. Such a vision does not fit our usual categories. It is not urban in the classical sense, but it is not untouched either. It asks us to expand our sense of what a city can be. And so we arrive at a gentle recognition. If the Amazon once held a megacity, it was likely a city of green, spread wide, woven into the forest, resilient in life but fragile in memory. Its ruins would not rise above the trees, but rest within them. Its traces would be quiet, subtle, enduring not in stone but in soil, plants, and patterns. We may never know its full form, but in the silence beneath the canopy, the possibility remains, a reminder that human presence can shape even vast forests without leaving sharp edges behind. What if the rivers of the Amazon were not only natural arteries but also cultural highways, carrying stories, goods, and connections between distant settlements? When we look at a map of the basin, it is easy to see the water as borders between regions. Yet for those who lived here, rivers were bridges, not boundaries. They linked people, offered food, and provided the simplest way to move across vast distances. Boats carved from single tree trunks, guided along quiet currents, may have connected villages in ways we are only beginning to imagine. Now let us pause to think of rivers as systems. In a forest where overland travel is slowed by dense vegetation, rivers become the easiest roads. A canoe can carry much more than a person walking. Fish, fruits, and pottery can move for days downstream, reaching people never met in person. In this way, rivers knit together communities. Archaeological traces hint at these networks. Pottery styles found far from their places of origin suggest exchange. Certain stone tools, made of materials not native to a region, also point to movement. Even in the pollen record preserved in sediments, we sometimes see sudden appearances of crops in places where they were unlikely to originate. These indirect signals suggest a web of trade and contact, stretched along waterways that wound through the forest. Yet here we must pause with humility. The traces of exchange are faint. A shard of pottery found far from its source could mean long-distance trade, or it could mean slow movement over generations, each community passing it on. We do not know whether these were vast trade systems or small, gradual flows. The absence of written records means we must rely on indirect evidence, and evidence always leaves gaps. Still, the language of rivers is patient. In sediments, chemical signatures accumulate, showing where agriculture intensified. In the shapes of earthworks, alignments suggest orientation toward water. In the spread of plant species, patterns reflect human movement along the banks. Even modern vegetation hints at older uses, with clusters of useful trees often lining ancient floodplains. All these signs remind us that rivers were not silent. They carry traces of human presence, even if those traces now rest quietly in mud and soil. Let us try a thought experiment. Imagine a settlement along a tributary. People carve canoes, paddle downstream, and exchange fish for ceramics, fruit for tools. A journey that might take weeks on foot is done in days by water. Now imagine hundreds of such settlements, each connected by rivers and streams. Goods move, stories move, people move. Over centuries, ideas of cultivation, building, and ritual may spread this way, not suddenly but like ripples expanding across a pond. Then imagine time passing. The communities decline or move. The boats vanish. The rivers remain, but now they carry only fish and fallen leaves. To our eyes, the water looks unchanged, yet its banks still hold pollen grains, shards, and soils that whisper of the lives once tied together by its flow. If we extend this thought even further, we may see rivers not just as trade routes but as cultural lifelines. They shaped how people organized themselves, where they built, and how far their influence reached. Perhaps the Amazon was less a single city and more a river-linked web of communities, spread widely but connected strongly by water. Such a system would leave fewer dramatic ruins, yet it could sustain populations and ideas on a large scale. And so we arrive at a quiet recognition. The rivers of the Amazon may still appear wild, but they may also be carrying memories of a network once vibrant and human. Their waters have washed away the boats, but not the subtle signs along their banks. The forest has hidden the people, but the rivers continue to flow, patient witnesses to connections we can only glimpse. They remind us that the past was not static, but fluid, carried forward gently, like currents in the Great Green Basin. What if the artifacts scattered quietly in the soil, broken pots, stone flakes, beads of clay, are not simply fragments of daily life, but small anchors of memory, tying the forest to the people who once shaped it? Unlike wood or leaves, these objects resist decay. Pottery, even when shattered, survives for centuries. A shard the size of a fingertip can still tell us about how it was made, what it once carried, and how it was used. In the Amazon, where so much dissolves back into earth, such fragments become especially precious. They are among the few direct voices of those who lived here before. Now let us pause to reflect on how pottery is made. Clay is dug from the ground, softened with water, sometimes mixed with fibers or crushed shells to strengthen it. It is shaped by hand or with simple tools, then hardened in fire. Each step leaves subtle markers, patterns of temper, traces of firing temperature, tiny scratches from tools. When we find even a broken piece, we can read these details, like notes left on a page. In the Amazon, many shards have been found within dark earth soils, often alongside charcoal. This pairing suggests daily use, cooking, storing, carrying food. Some fragments carry designs, simple lines, sometimes more complex patterns. Others are plain, but their thickness, color, and texture still speak of their makers. Yet here we must pause with caution. A fragment alone tells us little about scale. A few shards might mean a single family once lived there. Thousands in one place might suggest a larger settlement. But even then, we cannot always be sure if it was a permanent town or a site used seasonally. The silence between the shards is as important as the shards themselves. The language of artifacts extends beyond pottery. Stone flakes, though rare in the Amazon where suitable rock is scarce, show us where tools were made and used. Clay figurines, found in some places, hint at symbolic or ritual practices. Charms, beads, and pigments speak softly of personal adornment and identity. Each of these is small, but together they suggest a society with both practical needs and symbolic expression. Let us imagine gently a sequence. A family gathers near a hearth. Food is cooked in a clay pot, its surface darkened by fire. Over time, the pot cracks. A piece breaks off, discarded into the soil. Centuries pass. The pot itself dissolves, but the shard endures, buried in the ground. Hundreds of years later, someone uncovers it, turning it over in their hand. What was once a small accident of daily life becomes a rare surviving marker of presence. Now imagine this multiplied across thousands of households, across centuries. The soil becomes a slow archive of fragments. Most are silent, plain, unremarkable. But together they form a statistical signal, evidence of repeated human activity, evidence of lives that returned again and again to the same places. If we extend the thought further, we can see how artifacts anchor other forms of evidence. A shard found in dark soil connects fertility to daily life. A tool discovered near an earthwork links geometry to use. A bead lying by a river bank ties water travel to adornment. Each fragment does not stand alone. It fits into a wider web of traces, a pattern that suggests community even when no buildings remain. And so we rest in a quiet recognition. In the Amazon, artifacts are modest. They do not dazzle like gold or shine like jewels. They whisper. They survive not because they were meant to, but because clay and stone endure where wood and fiber vanish. Their survival does not prove a megacity, nor does their scarcity disprove it. They remind us that human presence is often recorded in the smallest of ways, in the objects made for daily use, broken in ordinary moments, and left behind to outlast their makers. They are fragments, but they are also memory, carried silently in the soil beneath the green canopy. What if the forest floor itself is not just soil and roots, but also a quiet archive of bones, seeds, and pollen, each acting as a fragile page in a story we are still learning to read? In the Amazon, where monuments dissolve and buildings vanish, it is often the smallest traces that endure the longest. Pollen grains no larger than dust, or seeds preserved in layers of sediment, can tell us what plants once grew, what people once ate, and how landscapes were managed. Bones of fish, birds, and mammals, though often fragile, can also survive in certain conditions, offering clues to diet and hunting. These remnants are not dramatic to the eye, but they are steady voices for those who know how to listen. Let us pause here to explain why pollen and seeds matter. Plants release pollen each year, carried by wind or water, and some of it settles in lakes, swamps, or river mud. Over centuries, these grains accumulate in layers. Each layer is like a calendar, showing what species were present at a certain time. Seeds, though larger, sometimes survive as well, especially if they were charred or buried in dark soil. By studying these remains, scientists can see when forests were cleared, when crops appeared, and when fields were abandoned. It is as though the forest has kept a diary, written not in words but in dust and fragments. But here we must pause with care. Not all pollen signals human activity. climate shifts can also change vegetation. Fires may spread naturally, altering what grows. Bones, too, may have been deposited by animals rather than people. The challenge is to distinguish natural from cultural, to see intention in patterns rather than in single finds. This is why interpretations remain cautious, often tentative, always open to revision. Still, the language of these traces speaks clearly enough to suggest presence. In some places, pollen of maize appears in sediments where it would not grow naturally. This suggests cultivation. Seeds of domesticated plants, such as squash or beans, have been found in layers dating back thousands of years. Bones of fish and turtles appear in abundance near ancient soils, hinting at diets rich in river life. Together, these details suggest not only survival but organized living, where food was grown, gathered, and exchanged across landscapes. Now let us imagine, gently, a sequence. A community plants a field of maize near a river. Each season, pollen drifts into the air, some falling into the water, sinking into mud. People harvest, cook, and discard seeds. Fish are caught, eaten, and their bones tossed into the soil. To those living there, these acts are ordinary, part of daily rhythm. Centuries pass. The fields vanish, the houses dissolve, the people move on. Yet in the mud and soil, the pollen and bones remain, locked in layers. 1,000 years later, someone cores into the earth and brings them up, grains of maize pollen still intact, bones still identifiable. What was once daily life has become the archive of memory. If we extend this thought, we see how the Amazon holds countless such archives, invisible until uncovered. Each lake, each floodplain, may contain layers of tiny records, waiting to be read. Some will confirm human presence, others will remain ambiguous. But taken together, they remind us that the forest is not silent. It holds within its mud the quiet imprints of those who lived and fed themselves here. And so we rest in a gentle recognition. Bones, seeds, and pollen are fragile, but they endure longer than houses or paths. They do not give us the image of a city with streets and walls, but they give us the texture of life, what was eaten, what was planted, what was gathered. They remind us that beneath the green surface, the Amazon holds an archive of the ordinary, the daily, the repeated. It is not a loud archive, but a soft one, whispering patiently to those willing to listen layer by layer. What if the climate itself, shifting slowly and sometimes abruptly, shaped not only the forests but also the rise and fall of those who may have lived within it? The Amazon today feels timeless, with rains returning each year, rivers swelling and receding in their rhythm. Yet across centuries, patterns change. Some periods bring wetter conditions, others long stretches of dryness. These shifts, almost invisible within a human lifetime, can leave marks in the soil, in sediments, and in the survival of communities. Now let us pause to consider how we know this. Within lakes and swamps, layers of mud settle each year, trapping pollen, charcoal, and chemical signatures. By reading these layers, scientists can reconstruct rainfall and vegetation over thousands of years. In some places, sediments show periods of reduced forest cover, suggesting drier times when clearings spread. In others, an increase in charcoal may reflect more frequent fires, whether natural or human. These quiet signals give us a picture of changing climates, like faded entries in a diary written by the land itself. Yet here we must remain careful. Climate does not act alone, and people are not only passive. A dry period may make farming difficult, but communities can adapt by shifting crops, building raised fields, or moving closer to rivers. A wetter phase may flood some areas while enriching others. The traces we see are never only the story of climate, but of the dialogue between people and their environment. Still, patterns emerge that invite reflection. In some regions of the Amazon, evidence of settlement declines around the same time as signs of drier conditions appear in lake sediments. This could suggest that communities struggled with changing water and soil. Or perhaps they moved, adapting elsewhere. We cannot say with certainty. Absence of clear ruins means we rely on indirect alignment, careful but incomplete. Let us now imagine, softly, a sequence. A community thrives along a river during a wet period. Fields are fertile, fish are abundant, orchards flourish. Generations pass in stability. Then, the rains grow less regular. The river runs lower, crops suffer, fish are scarcer. People adapt, but slowly the settlement weakens. Some move away, others remain but cannot maintain the same scale of life. Centuries later, the forest regrows, covering the memory. In the soil, though, pollen grains reveal the shift, crops declining, forest species returning, charcoal layers fading. A story of adaptation and retreat is written in mud, though the people themselves left no words. If we extend this thought further, we might see the Amazon as a landscape of cycles, where human presence expanded and contracted with the rhythm of climate. Not a single rise and fall, but many, each tied to rains, rivers, and resilience. Such cycles would leave behind scattered traces, rather than continuous ruins. They would explain why we find signs of dense life in some places, and silence in others. And so we arrive at a gentle pause. Climate leaves its imprint not only in forests and rivers but also in the patterns of human settlement. The Amazon, vast and alive, has always been shaped by these rhythms. What we see today is only one moment in a long sequence of shifts, both natural and cultural. The traces of past climates do not prove or disprove the existence of great cities. They simply remind us that human history here was interwoven with the changing sky and soil, adapting, retreating, and enduring in ways that still whisper beneath the green canopy. What if the forest, so seemingly eternal, was also fragile, and what if moments of collapse reshaped not only the land but also the people within it? Civilizations, no matter how grand or how modest, are always in dialogue with their environment. When that balance shifts, decline can follow. In the Amazon, where rains, soils, and rivers weave tightly into daily life, even small disturbances could ripple widely. Collapse here may not have been sudden, like walls falling in a storm, but quiet, families leaving, gardens abandoned, orchards going wild, roads fading beneath roots. Let us pause to reflect on how collapse is understood. It does not always mean catastrophe. Sometimes it is simply change, a slow turning of life into another rhythm. Communities may shrink, disperse, or shift elsewhere. What looks like disappearance to us may have felt like adaptation to them. Yet the traces left behind, abandoned soils, unfinished earthworks, fewer artifacts and later layers, tell us that something altered the continuity of life in these places. Now we may consider possible forces. Climate shifts, as we have seen, could make farming more difficult. Epidemics, carried later by contact with outsiders, may have devastated populations. Even internal choices, overuse of land, conflicts, or migrations, could contribute. Each factor may have layered with others, shaping patterns of decline. Yet we cannot know with certainty which weighed most heavily. The evidence is indirect, the signals faint, the silence large. Still, the language of traces gives us hints. In sediment cores, pollen of crops sometimes decreases suddenly, replaced by forest species, suggesting fields were abandoned. In archaeological layers, charcoal diminishes, hinting at fewer fires for cooking or clearing. In the distribution of artifacts, once dense areas grow sparse. These subtle signals suggest not only change, but a withdrawal of human presence. Now let us imagine, softly, a sequence. A thriving community tends its gardens and orchards. Roads link it to others, goods flow along rivers. Generations live in rhythm with the land. Then, a shift comes. The rains change, or disease spreads, or outsiders arrive. Slowly, families leave. The gardens are left untended, the dark soils still fertile but unused. Forest seeds sprout, roots reclaim paths. Within decades, the place is silent. From above, only canopy remains. Beneath, the traces endure, dark soil, shards of pottery, faint embankments. Centuries later, someone finds them, fragments of a story once whole. If we stretch this thought further, we see collapse not as an end, but as a folding back into the forest. Unlike stone cities that linger in ruins, Amazonian settlements may have dissolved almost completely, leaving only faint patterns. Their disappearance does not mean they were small or unimportant. It means that the forest was a powerful partner, always ready to reclaim. And so we come to a gentle recognition. Collapse in the Amazon may not have been dramatic, but quiet, like a song fading into silence. The traces we find today remind us not only of life, but also of its fragility. They show us that presence and absence are often intertwined, that the forest holds memory both in what it reveals and in what it hides. To imagine collapse here is to imagine transformation, not finality, a shift from human order back to green, from settlement to canopy, from sound to stillness. What if the great silences of the Amazon are not empty at all, but the result of encounters so profound that they erased as much as they revealed? When Europeans arrived on the edges of the basin, they carried not only goods and tools, but also diseases unseen and unimagined by the people already living here. Illnesses like smallpox, influenza, and measles moved faster than explorers, spreading from community to community, long before the first direct contact in many regions. Entire groups may have weakened or vanished, leaving behind forests that quickly reclaimed their clearings. To us, centuries later, it can seem as if little was ever there. But what we are seeing may be the afterimage of epidemic collapse. Let us pause to reflect on scale. In a forest where wood and clay dissolve, people's greatest traces are in soil, in plants, and in memory. If large populations once lived here, and if they declined rapidly after new diseases spread, the forest would have grown back in only a few decades. Houses would vanish in a single generation. Roads would fade in 2 or 3. Yet the soils enriched with charcoal and nutrients, the clusters of useful trees, the faint geometric shapes in the ground, they would remain, even if their meaning became harder to read. This is why many researchers suggest that contact itself reshaped the archaeological record, thinning it out before careful eyes could ever see it. But here we must remain cautious. We cannot assign all absences to disease. Populations may have shifted for other reasons: climate, conflict, migration. And the scale of epidemic decline is still debated. Some estimates imagine vast losses, others are more modest. The truth is likely complex, different in each region. What matters is that the impact of contact was not only cultural, but ecological, changing how the forest itself grew in the centuries that followed. The language of traces here is subtle but persistent. Sediment layers sometimes show sudden declines in burning, as if fields were no longer cleared. Pollen of cultivated crops disappears from cores, replaced quickly by forest species. Historical reports from the earliest travelers describe villages and towns, yet decades later, those same routes appear empty. The forest did not grow suddenly richer, it filled the spaces left behind. These shifts are not loud, but they align with what epidemics could have caused. Let us imagine, gently, a sequence. A community thrives along a riverbank. They farm, fish, and trade with neighbors. Then word comes of illness upriver. Soon, people begin to fall ill here too. Within a season, many die, others leave, the village grows quiet. Within a few years, orchards are untended, gardens overgrown. Children no longer play on the paths. Within decades, the forest has swallowed the place, trees growing where homes once stood. Centuries later, nothing visible remains, yet beneath the canopy, the soil is still dark, the fruit trees still more abundant than in untouched forest. If we extend this thought across the basin, we see not a single disappearance, but many, scattered like extinguished lights across a wide landscape. Each silence may represent not the absence of life, but the aftermath of sudden decline. What looks to us like an untouched wilderness may in part be a regrown landscape, a forest carrying memories we cannot easily see. And so we arrive at a quiet recognition. The Amazon's silence may not mean it was never filled with human voices. It may mean those voices faded suddenly, leaving the forest to speak for them. Epidemics carried across the rivers and paths could have transformed the land as much as axes or fires. Their traces are faint, indirect, written in absence rather than in presence. But even absence can be a kind of evidence, reminding us that history here is not only in what remains, but also in what has been erased. What if the stories told by the first travelers, crossing into the edges of the Amazon, are not exaggerations or myths, but reflections of realities we can barely reconstruct today? When chroniclers and explorers wrote of large villages, organized fields, and bustling trade, their words seemed for a long time like fantasy. Later visitors, arriving after disease and disruption, found little of what had been described. They assumed the earlier reports were embellished. But perhaps those first accounts were closer to truth, glimpses of a landscape that had already begun to change. Now we may pause to consider how fragile memory becomes when written by outsiders. A chronicler records what he sees, but also what he expects, what surprises him, and what his culture values. His descriptions are never neutral. And yet, when separate accounts mention similar patterns, villages aligned along rivers, networks of cultivated fields, orchards of useful trees, we cannot dismiss them entirely. They may carry echoes of systems that later disappeared. The difficulty lies in the gap between words and material traces. Many written reports speak of thousands of people gathered in places where today the forest appears untouched. Archaeology shows signs of settlement, yet often more modest than the scale described. How do we reconcile this difference? Perhaps the observers misunderstood what they saw. Perhaps they described peak moments rather than steady life. Or perhaps, by the time archaeology arrived, much had already been erased. The absence of stone ruins makes it harder to confirm or deny such accounts with certainty. Now let us pause and listen to the language of these early records as indirect evidence. They often mention the abundance of food, fields of manioc, maize, and fruits. They describe raised houses, built to resist floods, and boats crowding rivers. Some note carefully planned clearings and large communal spaces. These details, modest yet consistent, align with what we know from soils, earthworks, and plant distributions. Even if numbers were overstated, the core patterns may hold truth. Let us imagine, softly, a thought sequence. A traveler drifts along a wide river in the 16th century. He sees smoke rising from multiple villages along the banks. He counts houses, guesses at populations, and records them in his notes. A generation later, another traveler comes the same way. Now the villages are fewer, some silent, others abandoned. He writes instead of wilderness, of endless trees, and assumes that the earlier reports were fanciful. Centuries later, we read both accounts, uncertain which to believe. But beneath the soil, dark earth still stretches, pottery shards still rest, fruit trees still cluster. The land itself offers quiet confirmation that people once shaped it more than the later silence suggests. If we extend this thought, we see that written memory and material traces are not opposites, but companions. Words may exaggerate numbers, but they may capture feelings, of density, of activity, of human presence, that align with subtler signals in the soil. The combination of both kinds of evidence, fragile though they are, helps us imagine a past richer than either alone can show. And so we arrive at a gentle recognition. Early accounts of the Amazon may not be precise maps of population, but they are not empty dreams either. They are impressions of a landscape alive with human activity, seen at a moment just before change swept it away. Their exaggerations remind us of the limits of words, and their details remind us of the resilience of memory. They do not prove a megacity, nor do they disprove it. They remain, like the forest itself, layered and complex, whispering possibilities across the centuries. What if the knowledge of those who once lived in the Amazon has not disappeared completely, but continues to flow quietly through the traditions of indigenous peoples today? While archaeological traces give us fragments of the past, living communities carry with them practices and understandings that may be direct continuations of ancient ways. The forest is not only a place of trees and rivers, it is also a library of knowledge, preserved not in stone but in memory, ritual, and daily practice. When we listen carefully, we can hear echoes of old urban systems and the skills and stories of the people who still shape the land. Now let us pause to notice how this works. Many indigenous groups practice shifting cultivation, moving fields in cycles that allow the forest to regenerate. Others create orchards of useful trees, encouraging certain species to thrive in carefully chosen places. Fishing techniques, often highly adapted to seasonal floods, reveal a deep understanding of the rhythms of water. These practices may appear simple, but they are based on detailed knowledge accumulated over countless generations. In them, we may glimpse methods that once supported larger populations across wide landscapes. Yet here we must remain cautious. It is tempting to assume that present-day practices are exact survivals of the past. But cultures change, adapt, and reshape themselves with time. What we see today may be fragments, reconfigured by centuries of contact, disruption, and resilience. The continuity is partial, layered, never pure. And still, the persistence of certain knowledge, of soils, plants, rivers, suggests threads connecting present and past. The language of traces here is not only in the soil or the pollen, but in words, songs, and techniques. The way certain plants are cultivated in clusters mirrors what archaeologists see in the distributions of useful species around ancient earthworks. The management of dark earth, still practiced in some places, echoes the creation of fertile soils long ago. Even ritual landscapes, where certain groves or rivers are considered sacred, may align with spaces shaped centuries before. These are not proofs, but resonances, quiet signals that memory flows not only through matter, but also through people. Let us try softly a thought experiment. Imagine a community today planting orchards of Brazil nut trees. Children help their elders, learning when to gather, how to prepare, how to burn and enrich the soil. Centuries pass, generations repeat these tasks, even as languages shift and stories adapt. The forest grows around them, but the practice endures. Now imagine that an archaeologist, far in the future, studies the soil and finds clusters of useful trees and patches of dark earth. They wonder about ancient settlements, unaware that the practice had continued quietly through the centuries, woven into daily life. In this way, tradition becomes both present and past at once. If we stretch this thought, we see that the Amazon itself may be a living archive, where indigenous knowledge holds as much weight as archaeological shards. To focus only on ruins is to see half the picture. To listen to present communities is to hear how the forest has been managed, remembered, and reshaped continuously. And so we arrive at a gentle recognition. The legacy of ancient Amazonian life is not gone. It is carried in seeds planted, in fires tended, in soils enriched, in rivers fished with care. It is not a frozen survival of the past, but an evolving thread, resilient and adaptive. The forest itself may be the largest monument, not in stone, but in knowledge still living, still practiced. To understand the past fully, we must not only look down into the soil, but also listen outward, to the people who still call the forest home. What if the tools we use today, satellites circling far above the canopy, and computers processing invisible signals, are not only aids to modern science, but also instruments that let us glimpse the buried shapes of forgotten landscapes? The Amazon, vast and green, conceals its past beneath endless leaves. Yet from the sky, small patterns appear, faint lines where trees grow differently, geometric outlines that resist blending with the natural forest. Technologies such as LiDAR, which sends pulses of light through the canopy, allow us to see the ground beneath, as if the forest had briefly stepped aside. Now let us pause to understand this more clearly. LiDAR works much like an echo. A signal is sent, it bounces back, and the time it takes to return tells us the distance. With billions of such signals, a map can be drawn, showing hills, depressions, and shapes invisible to the naked eye. When applied to the Amazon, this method has revealed ancient earthworks, straight roads, and even clusters of mound-like structures. From above, what seemed like untouched forest becomes a quiet archive of human geometry. But here we must be careful. Technology can reveal shapes, but it cannot by itself tell us their meaning. A square outline on the ground could be a ceremonial enclosure, or a defensive wall, or simply a field boundary. A road-like line may have been a path for travelers, or a canal for water. Without artifacts, soil analysis, or other supporting evidence, interpretation remains open. What LiDAR and satellites provide is a new way of seeing, not final answers. The language of these digital traces is delicate. Pixels and light points, when layered carefully, show the persistence of order within what looks like wilderness. Patterns repeat, circles and squares, alignments that stretch straight for kilometers. These are not common in natural landscapes, and so they suggest planning. Yet their faintness reminds us that human presence here was interwoven with nature, not imposed in stone. The forest grew back, but its floor still remembers. Let us try a thought experiment. Imagine standing in the Amazon centuries ago, when communities still shaped these spaces. From the ground, a road is clear, wide, trodden, connecting one settlement to another. From above, orchards line the route, geometric clearings expand along its sides. Time passes. The people leave, the forest returns. From the ground, all disappears into green. But from the sky, centuries later, the road still lingers as a subtle rise, the clearings as faint outlines. Technology, like a patient observer, captures these ghosts of geometry and brings them into view again. If we extend this thought further, we may see that modern science is not creating new evidence, but uncovering layers already present. The forest holds memory in soil and shape. Our instruments simply give us new eyes to see it. Just as pollen and sediment speaks through microscopes, so earthworks speak through satellite lenses. Each method is a translation of traces into language we can interpret. And so we arrive at a gentle recognition. Technologies like LiDAR and satellite imaging are not final keys to the Amazon's mysteries, but they are quiet companions in our search. They reveal patterns that align with ancient presence, yet they remind us of the need for humility. What we see from above are outlines, suggestions, possibilities. They encourage us to imagine networks of life now hidden, and to approach the forest not as empty, but as layered with memory. These tools do not resolve uncertainty, they deepen it in a more precise way. The Amazon, viewed from the sky, becomes not less mysterious, but more quietly eloquent. What if the Amazon, instead of being seen only as forest or wilderness, could also be understood as a layered archive, where geology, soil, and vegetation hold memory in ways as real as books or ruins? Unlike stone cities that leave behind walls and towers, the Amazon preserves its stories in subtler forms, in the darkness of earth enriched by human hands, in the clusters of useful plants where settlements once stood, in the quiet alignments of earthworks softened by centuries of rain. To read this archive is to move slowly, piecing together faint signals, knowing that absence may mean only that memory has taken a different shape. Now let us pause to notice what an archive means here. In our daily lives, an archive is a collection of documents, papers, records, files, kept safe in drawers or on shelves. In the forest, the drawers are layers of soil, the shelves are riverbanks and lake beds, and the records are pollen grains, seeds, shards, and chemical traces. Unlike paper, they do not tell us directly who lived or what was said. They whisper instead of crops once grown, fires once lit, paths once walked. Each layer is a page, but the writing is indirect, requiring patience to read. The challenge, of course, is that much of this writing has faded. Wood rots, fibers dissolve, rain washes away fragile remains. This is why archaeologists often find only fragments, dark soils, clusters of pottery, outlines of mounds. Yet these fragments are not meaningless. Just as a torn page can still reveal a story if we follow its words carefully, so too can these faint traces reveal patterns when studied together. The language of traces is cumulative. A single shard may be chance, but dozens in one layer suggest habitation. A patch of fertile soil may form naturally, but kilometers of such patches, enriched with charcoal, suggest deliberate creation. A line in the ground may be a river terrace, but a series of parallel lines that cross straight through forests suggests planning. None of these signals alone is decisive, but in their combination they form a kind of quiet chorus, pointing gently to a more complex human past. Let us try a thought experiment. Imagine that we treat the forest as a library. Each tree is like a word, each soil layer like a paragraph. Most of the text is natural, describing rainfall, floods, and growth. But interspersed are sentences written by people, charcoal, pottery, orchards. If we skim too quickly, we miss them. If we read too closely, we risk mistaking natural variation for human action. But if we step back and read the whole, the patterns emerge, clusters of useful words, alignments of meaning, hints of a narrative. The Amazon becomes not an empty space, but a text with human chapters hidden inside. If we extend this thought, we may see why our knowledge remains uncertain. Unlike stone ruins, which stand firm and visible, the Amazon's archive is partial and always at risk of being overwritten by the forest itself. Fires erase pollen. Floods wash away bones. Roots break apart pottery. Yet some traces endure, because soil is stubborn, because clay resists, because seeds fossilize. These are the quiet keepers of memory, reminding us that history here is fragile, but not absent. And so we arrive at a gentle recognition. The Amazon's past is not stored in monuments of stone, but in layers of living and decaying matter. Its archive is not linear, not easy to read, but layered and interwoven with nature. To understand it, we must accept uncertainty, listen for whispers, and remember that absence is not proof of silence. The forest, in its vastness, is both forgetful and remembering, erasing walls, but preserving soils, covering paths, but sustaining orchards. It is an archive written not in ink or stone, but in life itself. What if the way we imagine the Amazon today is itself a kind of layer, a cultural filter that shapes how we read the traces beneath the forest? For centuries, outsiders described this region as an untouched wilderness, a place of pure nature, vast and empty. This idea, repeated in books and maps, became almost as powerful as the forest itself. It guided what explorers expected to see, what scientists sought to prove, and what stories were passed down. But perhaps this vision of emptiness is less a fact and more a memory of absence, created after epidemics, after disruptions, after the traces of people had already begun to fade. Now let us pause to notice how perception works. When we see an overgrown ruin in a field, we recognize it as human-made because stone walls remain. But in the Amazon, where wood rots and clay dissolves, ruins blend into trees. To an untrained eye, a mound may look like a natural hill, an old road like a ridge. If our expectations are shaped by the idea of wilderness, we may pass by these signals without noticing. In this way, our mental image can erase evidence as effectively as time itself. Yet careful research reminds us that ideas shift with new evidence. Where once the Amazon was considered too poor in soil to support large populations, we now know of vast regions of dark earth, created through long-term soil management. Where once early reports of villages were dismissed as fantasy, satellite and LiDAR studies revealed geometric earthworks and linear features beneath the canopy. Each discovery loosens the hold of the wilderness myth, replacing it with a more nuanced vision. But we must remain cautious here too. New interpretations carry their own risks of exaggeration, of overfilling the gaps with speculation. The truth likely lies between extremes, not untouched forests, not endless cities, but a landscape shaped and reshaped by people in ways subtle and enduring. The language of traces reflects this balance. Soil chemistry shows where people lived, but not how many. Tree distributions show past management, but not whether it was deliberate planting or selective care. Archaeological surveys map thousands of sites, yet these do not automatically equal urban density. Each signal whispers of presence, but none shouts of certainty. This is why interpretation must remain slow, layered, and careful, resisting both the emptiness myth and the temptation of grandeur. Let us imagine, softly, a sequence of perception. In the 16th century, travelers described vibrant communities along the rivers. In the 18th, new visitors find only forest and assume their predecessors exaggerated. In the 20th, scientists conclude the soils are too poor for complex societies. Then, in the 21st, new tools reveal vast networks of earthworks. Each generation rewrites the story, guided by its own lens. The Amazon remains the same beneath, but our vision of it shifts, layer by layer, like mist moving across a landscape. If we extend this thought, we may see that our challenge is not only to uncover the traces in the soil, but also to uncover the traces in our own assumptions. The forest holds memory, but so do we, and both can obscure as much as they reveal. To read the Amazon's past, we must be aware of how our expectations color the evidence we gather, how the wilderness myth still lingers even as new data accumulate. And so we rest in a gentle recognition. The Amazon is not only an ecological mystery, but also a cultural one. Its past is written both in soils and in stories, both in pollen and in perception. To see it clearly, we must accept uncertainty, letting go of myths of emptiness without rushing to replace them with myths of grandeur. In that balance, we may find a truer rhythm, one that honors both the forest and the people who have shaped it across centuries. What if the forest itself is not only the stage on which history unfolded, but also one of the main actors, shaping and reshaping the rhythm of human life within it? The Amazon is not a passive backdrop. It breathes, shifts, and transforms, and those who lived here had to adapt continually to its cycles. Floods expand the rivers for months, then retreat, leaving fertile silt but also uncertainty. Forest soils resist conventional farming, yet respond richly to careful management. The canopy shades and cools, but also hides paths, roads, and clearings. To live here, communities had to read the forest as a partner, understanding its moods much as one reads the tide or the seasons. Now we may pause to notice how this partnership worked. In fertile river floodplains, people grew crops that thrived in silt-rich soils. On higher ground, they created dark earth, turning poor soil into a living reservoir of fertility. They planted orchards that needed little care once established, ensuring food across decades. They learned when to fish, when to plant, when to burn, always in step with cycles of rain and drought. This was not domination of the forest, nor surrender to it, but a kind of dialogue, a balance found through trial, error, and patience. Yet here we must recognize the limits of what we know. We can see the results: patches of dark earth, clusters of useful plants, traces of fire, but we cannot know fully the methods, the intentions, or the scale. Did people see themselves as reshaping the forest, or as simply working within its flows? Were these systems designed consciously, or did they grow gradually from practice? These questions remain open, and our answers remain cautious. Still, the forest itself carries signs of this long relationship. Where orchards persist, we see species distributions that differ from untouched forest. Where dark earth lies, we see soil layers rich in nutrients, still supporting crops centuries later. Where floodplains are examined, we find old channels, sometimes redirected, hinting at water management. These are the quiet signatures of partnership, the traces of a dialogue between people and place. Let us imagine, softly, a scene. A group clears a small patch of forest, burns wood and charcoal into the soil, and plants manioc. Over years, they add scraps, ashes, and waste, enriching the soil further. Children grow up eating from these gardens, then plant new orchards nearby. Generations pass. The community shifts, perhaps moves, but the soils remain, fertile long after. Forest grows back, but fruit trees still stand, clustered together like markers of memory. Centuries later, someone tests the soil and finds it dark, still alive with nutrients, and realizes that this too is a kind of monument, less visible than stone, but equally enduring. If we extend this thought, we see that the Amazon is neither wilderness nor city in the familiar sense, but something between, a hybrid landscape, part natural, part cultural, both at once. The forest carries within it human memory, not carved in stone but grown into the very fabric of soil and trees. To understand it, we must accept that humans and forests were never separate here. Each shaped the other, weaving a pattern of resilience and fragility. And so we come to a quiet recognition. The Amazon is not only a setting for ancient life, but also its co-creator. The forest erased many traces, yet preserved others. It gave challenges, yet also offered abundance. Its silence today may feel overwhelming, but beneath it lies the echo of countless interactions, a record written not in ruins, but in living systems. To imagine this is to imagine not conquest, but coexistence, not a city hidden beneath trees, but a dialogue carried across centuries, still visible if we learn how to read gently. What if the Amazon's silence today is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of time, where echoes of many lives have simply grown faint? When we look at the forest now, we see continuity of green, but beneath it lies discontinuity of memory. Populations once numerous declined sharply after contact with disease and disruption. Villages dissolved, roads overgrew, and voices faded. The result was not only physical absence but also a shift in perception. Later travelers saw only forest, and from this came the enduring image of wilderness. Yet if we pause, we notice that disappearance in the historical sense does not mean erasure in the ecological sense. Let us stay here for a moment. When people left or were lost, their orchards remained, their dark soil stayed fertile, their altered landscapes continued to bear witness. These traces were not loud. They blended into the forest's own growth, becoming less visible with each generation. But they did not vanish. They endured quietly, waiting for those who would learn to read them. This duality, absence of people, persistence of traces, explains much of the confusion that followed. Observers spoke truth from their own perspective. The forest did feel empty, and yet beneath, it was not untouched. Now we may reflect on how fragility and resilience coexist. Communities may disappear quickly, through epidemic or upheaval, yet their knowledge lingers in soils and species distributions. Roads may vanish under vines, yet their alignments may remain in subtle ridges. Even pottery, broken and buried, carries fragments of lives. These traces form a second kind of memory, one not dependent on continuous habitation, but stored in matter and landscape. The language of traces here is layered. Charcoal tells of fire used for enrichment, even centuries later. Fruit trees reveal deliberate clustering, even after caretakers have gone. Soil nutrients remain enhanced long beyond their makers. Each of these is a marker of presence that outlasts absence. They show us that disappearance is never total, but relative. What fades in human memory may remain legible in ecological archives. Let us try a thought experiment. Imagine a great network of villages, connected by paths and rivers, alive with cultivation. Then imagine waves of disease spreading faster than contact, removing people before their systems could recover. Within a few decades, numbers collapse. Houses fall, gardens overgrow, and silence deepens. Centuries pass. From the perspective of those arriving later, it seems as though nothing had been there. But from the perspective of the soil, of the trees, of the buried shards, memory is intact. It is simply quieter, needing different tools to hear. If we extend this thought, we realize that absence in history is often a matter of scale. Human lives are short, forests are long, soils longer still. To us, centuries of silence feel permanent. To the land, they are only pauses. This is why the Amazon can appear both empty and full, both forgotten and remembered. It depends on which layer we choose to listen to, and how patient we are in hearing it. And so we come to a gentle recognition. The disappearance of Amazonian societies was not total. Their voices fell silent, but their traces endure. The forest absorbed their memory, reshaped it, softened it, but did not erase it. To see this is to accept that history is not only written in words or monuments, but also in soils, seeds, and patterns of growth. Disappearance here is another form of persistence, subdued, patient, and waiting for us to look closely. What if the Amazon we see today, with its vast canopy and unbroken horizon, is not the ending of a story but a pause between chapters? What if its green silence is less an absence and more a continuation, holding within it both memory and possibility? When we reach this point, after wandering through soils, rivers, orchards, and traces, we may sense that the question of an ancient megacity is not one to be answered with certainty, but one to be lived with. The forest itself resists finality. Its cycles of growth and decay remind us that nothing here is fixed forever. Let us pause and reflect on time. Civilizations rise and fall in centuries, yet soils remember for millennia. Floods wash away villages in days, yet tree distributions echo choices made long before. What feels permanent to us is brief to the forest, and what feels lost to us may still persist beneath. This tension between ephemerality and endurance is the quiet rhythm of the Amazon's past. Our knowledge, too, follows this rhythm. Archaeologists uncover patterns, scientists trace soil chemistry, satellites reveal shapes. Each new method sharpens vision, yet none can resolve the full picture. We see fragments, dark earth, broken shards, faint roads, and from them we weave possibilities. but the fabric remains thin, never a complete garment. This is not failure, but the nature of history in a place where stone was not the medium of memory. Here, memory is held in matter less durable, yet still eloquent. The language of traces continues to guide us. A layer of charcoal whispers of fire used for cultivation. A line of mounds suggests deliberate shaping of land. A cluster of useful species hints at orchards planted long ago. These are subtle signals, like notes carried faintly through mist. To hear them, we must lean close, and even then, the melody remains incomplete. Absence of proof does not mean absence of presence. Now let us imagine, softly, a thought experiment. Suppose we return to the forest centuries from now. What would remain of our own presence? Concrete might crumble, metals corrode, plastics linger. Roads may vanish beneath vines, cities may turn to dust, but some chemical signatures, some altered soils, would remain. Future archaeologists might ask the same questions we ask today. Was there once a city here? Or something different, something more interwoven with nature? The echoes of our own lives remind us that what endures is often not what we expect. Extending this thought, we see that the Amazon's mystery is not only about the past. It is also about perspective. By imagining it as a possible megacity, we stretch our understanding of what human landscapes can be, either purely urban nor purely wild, but a continuum. This imagination reshapes how we view the present forest, not as untouched, but as layered, resilient, inhabited in ways both past and present. And so we arrive at a quiet recognition. The Amazon may or may not have been the site of a great city. What matters is that it holds memory, written not in stone but in soil, water, and growth. Its silence is not emptiness, but a softer kind of record, one that asks us to read carefully and accept uncertainty. The forest reminds us that history is vast, that our vision is partial, and that humility is a form of understanding. Let us rest, then, with this open pause. The question remains, and perhaps it should. For in not knowing fully, we are reminded of scale, of centuries, of rivers, of forests older than memory. If this rhythm speaks to us, if this way of listening feels close, we already know how to continue.